a trade. That was a sign. Which team do you think benefited from that the most, about adding that huge piece, like Paul Millsap going to Denver?
Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
You forgot to mention that one. Yeah, that was a great trade.
I think that's correct.
Minnesota.
Minnesota did well.
Minnesota, yes. But
a lot of teams did well.
I guess you could say Minnesota because they're trying to become a playoff team, so they definitely probably will be an 8th seed. I think they'll be an 8th seed this year.
I'm going to go higher than that.
Yeah, I think they could be higher, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could see 6th seed.
Yeah.
I could. I really like Minnesota's roster. And the Nets got better, too.
They sure did.
I mean, adding D'Angelo Russell, that was huge. I'm still not over that. That was so great.
Excited. Especially with your Russell shirt that you be wearing sometimes.
Yep, I love that shirt.
Yeah.
On that note, let's take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, because we will have an exclusive interview with Thomas Barthel coming up next. He's the author of Babe Ruth and the creation of the celebrity athlete. It's coming up next on Beyond the Game on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Okay, forest animals, today is a new day. Kids are coming to the forest, and it's up to us to make their visit a good one. Sparrow.
Yes?
Have you practiced the most popular bird songs for the year?
Of course.
Catchy. I like it. Okay, River.
Dude.
How's the temperature?
It's a refreshing 52 degrees, man. Perfect for a little riverside shoeless relaxation.
Ah, good. Owl, you here? Course. Who's asking? I am. Look, you know the drill. Sleep during the day, scare the kids at night. Perfect. I love my job. Oak Tree?
Sup?
Still in the same place I left you last year. That's what I like. Consistency.
Well, it's not like I'm going anywhere for the next couple 100 years.
I know. I love it. Turtle. Turtle.
He's not here yet, man.
He's late every morning. You'd think he would have learned by now to leave the night before our meetings. Okay. Squirrel. Has anybody seen Mr. Squirrel?
The forest has been preparing just for you. Visit a forest near you today. To learn more about cool things to do in the forest, visit discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Wait, hold up. I don't think you know about It's Saucy. It's flavorful, extraordinary, and mind-blowing. Hey, tune into It's Saucy, where I give you nothing but the greatest music out from back then till now, along with hip-hop news and trending topics. It's DJ Steph. Just know that.
It's saucy.
Listen to the Saucy Hour Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock here on the Voice of Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC.
The average time a resume spends on an HR manager's desk is 7 seconds, and most of them are tossed aside. Now imagine if one of those resumes belonged to Yasmin, who was
living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
You are listening to Beyond the Game on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I am Jacob Volk. Sitting across from me, Brandon Johnson, Dominic Arbolino, and Eric Fischetti. And we are fortunate enough to be joined by Thomas Barthel, the author of Babe Ruth and the creation of the celebrity athlete. Thomas, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You may want to know I'm from Farmingdale.
Are you from Farmingdale?
I am.
Long Island native.
A long time ago, but from Farmingdale. And I taught for 42 years at a community college.
Did you teach at Suffolk?
I taught at Herkimer. I have many friends at Suffolk.
Okay.
Okay. We got a Long Island kid.
I like it. So what exactly is your book about?
Well, I've written 6 books. Some of them are baseball. And I was a team photographer for a minor league team for a while. So I got to see different sides of baseball. And I always wondered a number of things about Babe Ruth, but one of them was, why was there never any citations in the 10 or 12 or so Babe Ruth books? Why are there no sources? And I began to see that the same stories kept getting repeated over and over again, and I wondered if, quite frankly, if any of them were true. I mean, obviously Babe Ruth is this gigantic figure, gigantic in a lot of ways, but I simply wondered whether they were true. So, whereas none of the Babe Ruth books have any kind of scholarly apparatus. They don't have any, for instance, they don't have any citations. They have very limited bibliographies, if at all. My book has 600 sources.
Wow, that's a lot.
My book has 76 primary sources from the newspapers and magazines at the time.
There are teachers here who would love you for that.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So I just wondered, stories about Johnny Sylvester, who was cured. He was dying and he was cured by Babe Ruth. Stories about Babe Ruth, sex life, Babe Ruth. I really wasn't interested, to tell you the truth, in all the other stories that I had heard that I couldn't find anything out about. And the first thing that struck me as I began to look into it was the absence of a man named Christy Walsh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Christy Walsh was the first sports agent. What people forget about that is that he wasn't just working for Babe Ruth. He was working for Newt Rockne, he was working for John McGraw, he was working for Ty Cobb. And in order to do that, he had a stable of writers, mostly New York, as you might imagine.
I was going to say.
Mostly New York sports writers that he would hire. And I began to think, well, if these people are hired to work for Christy Walsh, chances are they're not going to really ever say anything nasty about Walsh's clients.
How much influence did Christy Walsh have in Ruth's off-the-field ventures? I know he had some wild ones.
I would say that in the quite literally hundreds of things that Babe Ruth made money from. By the way, at one point, he was known to have been the, I guess you call it spokesman now. He had been the spokesman for 3 different automobiles in the same magazine.
Nice.
So Walsh was given pretty much permission to sign him up for anything. Ruth rarely communicated with Walsh. So from 1921, at least until 1940, Christy Walsh was his businessman. And he would not only sign him up for things. Ruth played in 200 barnstorming games, which, by the way, is a separate subject, and nobody else has ever covered in any detail. I have. It's an e-book, but it's there. Walsh would actually travel with Ruth. They'd get into a town, and Walsh would start looking around for people who wanted to hire Babe Ruth to come sit in their store, to get a shave in a barber shop. This is in every town.
Wow.
Cities. He even went into cities that had a population of 2,500. So he was every place. He was in Oil City, Pennsylvania. He was in towns. Well, anyway, that's a very long story.
I was going to say he was in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, quite literally. I mean, he was in Deadwood. He was in Nebraska. He was all over. It's extraordinary, because virtually from the first full year, 1915, until about 1932, he barnstormed every year. Every year, sometimes 20 games, sometimes 30 games. He would start in Maine, and he would go through Canada and end up in California playing games there. So Walsh had a lot to do with that. So look how this works out. Walsh is in charge of his publicity. He's hired sports writers to write about Ruth. There was a sports writer from the Daily News named Sidney Whipple who did nothing but follow Ruth around every day. If Ruth got a haircut, Sidney Whipple wrote about it that day. He was a celebrity unlike anybody else. Other celebrities of the period, Charles Lindbergh. You want to get into literary people like Scott Fitzgerald. You could get into movie stars like Chaplin. None of them had the coverage. There were a number of years in that period where no one had more words written about him than Babe Ruth.
So staying with that train of thought, what can you tell us about a Ruth ghostwritten byline that Walsh sold to a newspaper syndicate for $15,000?
50,000 is probably too much. I'm doing this from memory, and my
15.
book is 136,000 words. So I remember 5,000.
Okay, 5,000. The number's irrelevant, but what exactly was it?
So the number isn't irrelevant because he was making 100 before Christy Walsh came along.
Okay. All right. So what exactly was it? Like, what's the story behind it?
It was written by Ford Frick. It was written by Ring Lardner. It certainly wasn't written by Babe Ruth. In fact, there were games where Ruth was not there.
Wow.
He was off on a hunting trip.
Yeah, that's right. Babe Ruth hunted. I forgot about that.
Yes, he did. A hunting trip or a fishing trip or looking for women trip.
Man after my own heart.
I'm trying to find a polite way of saying this. And people accepted it and understood it, and it was as if, well, people in the know understood Ruth wasn't writing this. Christy Walsh's book, by the way, is called Farewell to Ghosts, as in ghostwriters. So people forget that Babe Ruth was a serious businessman, and of course he was a serious entertainer. Certainly an entertainer in the sense that he was a vaudevillian. He would go barnstorming, and then he would do a vaudeville tour, and then he would sit down for a month, presumably. But he wasn't home. He was never home.
No, definitely not.
No.
All right, and can you lay out the story for us of Babe Ruth's cigars?
Yes. Very early in his career, he met a guy who was a dentist in Boston. And the dentist, and nobody seems to know anything about this, unfortunately, including me. But there was a guy named Johnny Igoe, I-G-O-E, who came to Ruth and said, I can manage your affairs for you. I can sign you up for communion breakfasts. I can sign you up to speak at the Knights of Columbus. And then you won't have the trouble of doing that. And, of course, Igoe would get his cut as well. And Igoe said, you've gotten to be Ruth's first full year as a pitcher in 1915. He had a very good year.
An excellent year.
And so he would be in demand, and Igoe would arrange it. He would take a cut, and Igoe said, we could do business here too. We could have a brand of Babe Ruth cigars. There'll be a picture of you on the lid of the box. I don't think a box has ever showed up at auction, by the way, but I'm sure it would sell for a lot of money if it did. But so in other words, as you say, right from the very beginning, he knew how to make money. And to ignore that part of Ruth in favor of stories of gluttony or adultery or whatever else
debauchery.
Or the how far a home run ball traveled. He was busy making money all the time, at least 11 months of the year for most of his baseball career, and for a very long time after that. He had radio shows after he retired, sponsored by Red Rock Cola.
Wow, there's a name out of the past for you. Talking to Thomas Barthel, the author of Babe Ruth and the Creation of the Celebrity Athlete. So, do you think it speaks volumes to Ruth's stardom that during World War II, Japanese soldiers would scream in English, and I quote, "to hell with Babe Ruth," in order to anger American soldiers?
Yeah, if I could find a source for that, I'd be very happy to.
It's on Wikipedia. That's my source.
Good thinking.
Well, by a strange coincidence, I published a book about baseball players and baseball managers and umpires and sports writers traveling overseas during World War II right into combat zones. For instance, Ducky Medwick and Leo DeRocha and other members of his group were 500 yards from the Nazi line in Italy. So I had some experience researching that kind of stuff. I don't know where that story came from. Let me give you another example. Maybe that will help a little bit. Ruth wanted to manage toward the end of his career, starting about 1930. By then he was in his 11th year with the Yankees. And the story is that he went to the owner of the Yankees, who just